starting point for everybody is, can you tell us your name and can you tell us what you do?
Yes, my name's Tom Jones. I'm a senior environment artist at Cambridge Studio, Sony's Cambridge Studio.
And can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
The environment work is basically, it's kind of world creation almost, to put a grand title on it. It's everything you see in the game that you interact with, the kind of levels you walk around with, the environments essentially. So it might be a jungle or a cityscape. So it's as grand as like big buildings, or it's as small as like cups and tables. And we also do vehicles and kind of go into a bit of dynamics. So it's actually quite a massive amount of content. Basically anything that isn't characters, it tends to kind of bleed into environment art almost. So it's a big bag of
So, as a kind of starting point, what do you think high definition means? Not in relation to gaming, but just to the punter in the street, to the person in the street, and where do you situate yourself in that mix outside of gaming?
I think generally it's a bigger picture. I guess it's more resolution. It's more detail. It's how I describe it to my girlfriend or something when I got my HD TV. It was like you get to watch Hollyoaks or something on a grander scale, and it's you get to see things more precisely and more sharper, and it's clearer. And I think with regards to how it affects me, I think it's probably only crept into my life through computer games, through working at Sony, and it's interesting my circle of friends looking at their reaction to it being, not really worrying about the industry or anything like that. That actually it's almost a buzzword, and it doesn't mean as much to them. I don't think it's just an expense that they're not quite at yet, I think, for a lot of them. And actually I was playing a game the other day with some friends around their house on just an LCD TV, and they plugged it in through component, and so the picture just wasn't very good, and I noticed it. I was like, oh, that would look a lot better on my TV, but it just didn't bother them. They were happily playing because they just hadn't really got any conception of what the difference might be yet.
So you don't think it's impacted on the general populace yet?
Not in Europe as much, certainly not in this country. I think it will get there like it has in America and overseas, but not to the extent that it will yet, I don't think.
Okay, so here we go. How's it impacted on you in terms of games, design and construction?
It's fundamentally it's meant more work. I think it's opened a lot of doors in what we can do and put on screen, which is really exciting, but it also means that we then have to fill that screen. It's a bigger canvas for us, but the kind of flip side is we need to fill that with more content and make sure that things hold up to that, to people looking at it, that scrutinising it that closely. So whereas before we could get away with stuff because you knew people wouldn't be able to see the details on things, now everyone you can look at things in here. We modelled it, you'd be able to see all those kind of micro details, which means that we have to spend a lot more time making them.
Does it impact on the things that you can do on screen? I mean, if you know that you've got to go into higher detail effectively, is that problematic? Outside of the fact that there's work and all the rest of it, I'm talking about within the game. Is there a way in which more is less?
I think, I guess you could get bogged down with too much detail with regards to, is it problematic on a day-to-day basis? I think it's almost a tricky thing to assess because it's come kind of hand in hand with PS3. They're like a bundle, HD and PS3, so it's like next gen development. It's not as though we had PS3 on PAL resolution and now we're making the step up and having to change things. It's just been a big shift going on to that as a whole. So we've had to adjust all our working methodologies to cope with the whole bag. So I feel like I'm not answering your question as pertinently as I should. But
no, anything that you say in response is the answer to the question. I'm not too worried about specifics, but I'm trying to. I suppose I'm trying to. Within the mix. There's an assumption that greater detail is better, but I'm just wondering if it isn't better.
I think that there's a danger the industry could become obsessed with it, and I think it's almost, we've been driving that forward a bit. You know, the search for realism and that whole side of things that's come along with HD and the next generation of consoles. And yeah, I question too whether that actually is a good thing for computer games, because that's what we are supposed to be making, and they're not just artistic kind of galleries as such. They're computer games for people to enjoy, and I think you could, and we probably will in some games, get the likelihood that the graphics will impinge on that because there's too much going on, because someone hasn't actually sat back and addressed it as the whole thing and decided whether it's working with the gameplay and allowing the character the player to see where the character's going within the environment and things like that. That actually they've overpopulated it because we almost can now. So I think there's a lot for us to think about, and a lot for us to think about quite quickly with everything else that's going on as well.
Right, so the assessment of what's going on is a practical issue, because there's hardly time to assess what's going on. But the question, just asking it another way, is about. In fact, let me just go to the paper here, because I'll be really direct. Right, in what ways does HD increase the pleasure of gameplay, or the converse, decrease the pleasure of game? I want to go right for the heart of it. Has it, in some way, damaged gameplay?
I think. Well, I think it's hard to, I'll sound like a politician now, it's hard to answer completely yes, completely no. I think there'll be examples for both case. I think there's a chance that people, the pressures that it's put on games making as a whole will mean that not as much emphasis is put on to gameplay, and I think it's almost the perception of what games should be now means that they have to look this certain standard, they have to look fantastic. And so it's actually, it's putting more emphasis on us to create fantastic visuals, which is fine, but I might get chucked out of the Artists Union for saying this, but it's more important that it's a good game. And I think you don't want the art to become detrimental to what in essence it is. And because we're still trying to do these games with a quick turnaround, you know, the public quite rightly doesn't know the extra implications of PS3 development and how much longer it takes to do things. So they just want their games frequently and for the same amount of money, which is absolutely fair. But that means something has to give, and I think there is a danger that it could be gameplay for certain games. So I think it's interesting what will happen over the next few years and whether we go full circle and games start to go away from realism.
Well,
I'm deviating slightly.
Can you have a stab at what may happen over the next few years?
And I think we're going to see people striving for realism in games for a while yet, but I think...
When you say realism, can you just
you know, imitating real life, so getting people on screen, characters on screen to look like real people, and for their faces to move like real people, and for environments to look realistic. But it's you know, you see games like Call of Duty and the war games and things where they're, you know, obviously trying to make it proper war-torn environment, and we have the power to do that now. But I think to actually answer one of your questions about how it could be a good thing, it does mean you can make environments and the game more immersive for the person playing it, which is obviously a great benefit to the experience. But by the same token, then it's almost touching on slightly political issues, I guess, if these games are looking more like real life and you're shooting someone and things like that. I think it starts to get a bit dangerous. And I I don't know how long that's going to carry on for. I don't know if I think it may get to the point where the public perhaps not tires of games just trying to look realistic, because I don't think they're ever going to look like real life. It's going to take too much, and that's not what a good game is about, essentially. Just because you have a realistic person and that they can speak properly, it doesn't mean it's going to be a good game. And if it means that all our games are taking 4 or 5 years to make, you know, Joe Punter isn't going to be happy with that. So I think, sorry, go on.
So, well, just the issue of symbolic representation, because the thing about photorealism, or the pursuit of photorealism, if you're working in a remote way, which you are, with a medium where you're actually manipulating symbols which you've given meaning to, i.e. characters or whatever. Sure. As soon as you engage in photorealism, then the line is blurring on the symbolic. So what do you think's...
I mean, it's a similar discussion we've had here when we've been coming up with new concepts, and actually I think the closer you strive for realism, the more people will compare it to real life. Like you only need to come down a few % from, say, making a character look completely realistic. It only needs to be stylized slightly, and people are so much more forgiving about things. But as soon as you put it on the same platform as a real life person, then yeah, that things do start to become a lot more jumbled, and I think people are a lot less forgiving. And yeah, with regards to playing a game, I think it's a really interesting topic, whether that is going to be a good thing for kids and you know, teenagers to be playing with these real life characters in real life environments. It's for the kind of medium we are, for what's supposed to be a fun, entertaining medium, for whether that's going to be really healthy or not. And there's obviously, you know, all the age ratings and things on games, but it's dangerous, shall we say. I think I haven't completely made up my mind, but I think we've already, you know, you've seen in the news over the past few years there have been particular games that have attracted the headlines, and I think we're in danger of that becoming more often.
Okay, so really the high definition thing is bringing that on.
Well, yeah, it's allowing us to do that. I think the public expect it because of the almost HD buzzword, that it's new and it's exciting, and they perhaps don't know exactly what HD is, but they know it will mean better graphics in games, and better graphics always seems to mean more realism. It's like the benchmark, I guess, that consoles have been tested against over the years, which is fair enough. So it's like for us to fulfill their expectation through HD, we have to go towards that, almost whether we like it or not, I think. And actually, you know, I think if you went and spoke to all the artists upstairs about what kind of game they'd like to make, they'd point to things like Okami or something, where it's you know, it's a really artistic and beautiful game, but it doesn't sell as well as we'd like it to, because the public perhaps just doesn't quite get it yet.
I mean, some artists are beginning to dip their toes into the game's water. I've heard of people downloading games engines and remodelling them so that art events can happen in game space. Do you know anybody that's working in this way, or?
Not personally. No, I mean, I think that's great if that's going on for more traditional artists that get involved. I think that the benefits of PS3 and obviously Xbox and the Wii, that they're creating communities and spaces for people to share things more, and that it is becoming a society. So the more people that tap into that and produce fun things for other people, then the better. And I think it's perhaps from those sources that you do get the really creative stuff, because they're doing it with no risks attached. They're doing it for their own enjoyment and to actually put a piece of art out there, I guess, whereas we're kind of governed by profits and making a successful game, and so we can't do everything we'd like to, unfortunately.
There's also limits on the processor, because everybody wants a piece of the processor to do their thing.
Quite, yeah. So yeah, it's a tricky puzzle to all fit
So
together.
is there anything that makes you want to work in high definition, bearing all of the small p political issues and moral issues that are around it, or is it just an inevitable?
I think I mean it has kind of been inevitable. It's just kind of happened. I guess we've just progressed into it. But it's certainly it's interesting. I mean, I've only obviously been doing it 5 years, but it already makes me seem like an old man when I speak to the kind of junior artists in my team, and when they're complaining of their really large textures and things that they haven't got enough resolution, and I'm saying, well, I had it like this size when I started 5 years ago, and actually it's not that long ago, but it's already progressed so far. But it's a good thing. Progression's always a good thing. We just need to find the right way to tap into it and get the best games through that and the best graphics. Having more resolution to do things isn't a bad thing. I don't think we should kind of embrace it. And
well, it's pretty clear that processors are going to improve in power and all the rest of it.
Exactly.
So like, where's it going to go?
Games or
games, but with the definition of things. And how do you think definition is going to level out, or what's?
Well, I think at the moment, obviously, most of the games are at 720p because it's just a more comfortable area for us at the moment, because we're getting used to the PS3 and everything else with all the other things we have to learn. So I imagine it will progress to 1080p, so that'll be the next step. So it'll be even more stunning visuals, I should hope. And then beyond that, I don't know, it's scary where you could imagine that the PlayStation 4 or something could be in a few years' time, with the technology of televisions and things progressing as well. I think you will. I imagine it will continue down the realism route, so that you will get games that do look incredibly realistic. But then will think there will be a turning point where perhaps they'll kind of go back to more old school traditions, and things will branch off. And particularly for the generating revenue. We have to be quite clever now into how we're going to make money, because production costs so much more.
And because the HD detail is requiring more people, you've got to turn around in the same amount of time. But so that means
exactly, same amount of time. The game costs the same. So, but you need to employ more. It's almost an equation that doesn't quite add up. The amount of people that own a PS2 aren't all going to suddenly go and buy a PS3, so there's actually going to be less people who own one. The game's going to cost more to make, not really make any more money through its actual retail price. So it's a tricky transitional time. And my team sizes here, it's part of the. I think it's taken everyone by surprise with the crossover from PS2 to PS3. And we were obviously talking earlier about this like kind of bedroom mentality in the games industry, which is really fun, but I think that's because it's still quite young, and it is having to mature a bit and adopt new techniques and working methods, and to make sure it's more efficient, because we can't afford to get things wrong so much, and there isn't the time to test things out and to actually almost be in a playground with ideas and putting things out there. Actually, the pressure is really on to come up with a great idea and make a great game quickly. So there's real impetus on staff and specialising, and I imagine it's becoming a lot more like the film industry and actual other more established.
As you were talking, it was beginning to strike me that that is the pressure on a feature. Or,
So it's. I wouldn't say it's scary. It's interesting. I think that you could almost do a documentary about the games industry as a whole and how it's progressed over the last kind of 10, 20 years, because it's been such a rapid development. And you see it from 1 year to the next, people kind of playing catch up with the consoles and catch up with the software they're using, and then you get students coming in and being really fantastic at the current level of software, and then so your old guys are playing catch up with them, and it never feels like we're we're settled unless it's right at the end of a console's life. But then another one comes along. So it means I think the good thing for the public is it's always trying to better itself. But I guess you want a period of stability within those longer periods for it to really hit the mark, which I think will happen with the PS3 and will happen with HD, and the games we make for it will.
So HD represents a level of stress for the average.
Well, for the average games maker, yeah, I guess you could correlate that. Yeah, it's yeah.
Okay, so going back to Marshall McLuhan's statement that the medium is the message, and the understanding in there that not only the content was what was being transferred, but the way in which the content was being received is part of the issue. Now, my question is around, and it's actually quite hard to get at. The thing about new digital technologies or digital technologies is the one thing that can be said is a series of processes. It, you know, to describe the medium is a hard thing because there doesn't seem to be a medium. There's a lot of maths going on.
Yeah.
Now, here's my question basically. If you took an old form medium like say stone carving,
Sure.
so you've got to obtain the stone, you've got to transport the stone, you've got to start hacking away at the stone and modelling the stone, and then you come to terms with where you've got to, and you've got a sculpture. Then you've got to transport it to the gallery, get an exhibition, transport it to the gallery, stick it on a podium, and exhibit. Now, if you took the stone out of the equation, what you've got left is a set of processes.
Yeah.
So is there in some way in which digitality, there is a medium if you only define it in terms of its processes, and where would HD sit in that mix?
It's a good question. I think perhaps where it becomes even more blurred is that now there are even more processes to make games, and that it's actually harder to put your finger on quite, even within art, even if you have just the medium of art, to put your finger on specific processes and points within that. So it's almost like you need to take the package game as the medium instead of trying to break it down into individual processes. I mean, they still contribute to the final thing. From an artistic point of view, I think, you know, now as opposed to a few years ago, it's because it's more specialised. There's less ownership in games, so there's less. It's almost like if people want to do artwork, so that people look at their artwork. But if your artwork is part of processes that are all intertwined and contributing to a larger thing, then it's a lot harder to say I did that when you did that with someone else and someone else. So it's interesting, not only as an whether it is an art form anymore, whether, you know, it stands alone by that with regards to individuality. It's so much a collaboration now, that I think it's just evolving in that way. But
is the expression of that medium the experience gained by the person using it?
Yeah, I think that it's the person who picks up the game at the end of the day and plays it, and that's the end result and what we're getting out of making games. So that, you know, the medium is almost well, it's to create enjoyment, isn't it? So I think it's harder to put it into a, you know, an art form or a media experience or a visual feast or whatever, because it offers so much more. So it's perhaps is why it's harder to break down. But it's certainly, I think the finished product is still responsible for its own message and the, you know, games in general for the message they put out and how that's perceived by the public, and how those perceptions are going to change over the next few years, and have changed obviously over the last 10, 15 years. So yeah, I still think there's a lot of mileage in it, and I think those perceptions will continue to change. partly because of HD and what that will do to games, just because we're going to keep evolving. So, and obviously we want them to become a part of every household, so there will be a lot to say on them.
Okay. Is there in after all of that, because that's a hard one, that one. is there anything you'd like to say that we haven't covered in terms of HD and gaming?
I mean, I guess the only thing that I was thinking about is actually kind of ruminating over when I was looking at your questions, thinking about, you know, what does HD mean for games? Okay,
Sorry.
let's.
You can have a fit. Go and have a fit, and we'll carry on. Just go up the corridor. Okay, so the thing that you were ruminating about.
Yes, sorry. Just saying. So, what I was trying to break it down. What does HD mean for games, and going down this realism route, and the clarity of the picture, and the fact that we can show so much more to the player. What that means is actually they're not having to fill in as many gaps by themselves, so it becomes less of a. They don't have to imagine as much. It's almost like film. You sit down and you watch it, and everything's there in front of you, as opposed to, you know, I still love reading books because you get to imagine everything in your head, and it's yours. You have the ownership over it. You know, no one else is going to have quite the same experience, and I think, you know, perhaps older games where they're more simplistic and you do have to expand on them yourself and create the worlds for yourself, it is quite exciting. Obviously that depends on a certain level of imagination and creativity in the individual, but...
You don't think there's an inverse connection between too much description, i.e. HD detail, and lack of gameplay? You don't think there's some terrible equation that happens with when there's too much of this, there's a lot less...
Well, maybe. I think as I said earlier, I think that there's... Because there's so much more going on in the game, gameplay's almost become, instead of being everything, it's shrunk a bit because everything else has got bigger alongside it and take up so much of our resources, as opposed to, you know, 5 guys making the game together and it being about what game they were making and them doing some graphics to work with the thing they programmed and to make that little game that turned out to be really fun and have, you know, quite a clear style of gameplay and a message. Whereas this, it's so many different people trying to all do the same thing, and because teams are so much bigger, there's new communication that we need to adopt and to work together collaboratively. It's not just, you know, a few guys, where it's a lot easier. And you can imagine the problems when the team goes beyond 100 people of all having to have the same unified vision and create a successful game. And essentially that's the stresses on our industry at the moment, I think. And because we're still young, generally speaking, as an industry, it's proving hard to kind of adopt those new techniques and grow. So yeah, I think it's certainly potentially contributes to less gameplay, which fundamentally we need to make sure that's the first thing we write down and make sure we hit that, which is why when games are good now, they do very, very well, because, you know, there aren't as many, I don't think, as there used to be.
Yeah, about directions, because there's an assumption that the high definition detail leads automatically to photorealism, but of course that's not necessarily a given.
No.
So is there a possibility of expanding or extrapolating definition and going into more abstract fields?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, saying the assumption is that's what we have to, or not have to do, but will do with it. It's the public's assumption, so we have to fulfill that assumption almost, you know, this first step into the next console's life. But there's already been a game called Flow on the PS3. You can download it on the PlayStation Network for a few pounds, and it's basically these shapes that take the form of say a fish, and you're going down underneath layers of the sea and catching other creatures, but they're all circles and symbols. But because of the clarity of it on HD, everything's so crisp and it's just delightful. And I actually showed my parents it, and they were far more interested in that than anything else. It was one thing that kind of got their attention into it, because they hadn't seen anything like that before. And I think that, for me, I think that's an avenue that's really exciting, but it's just a more dangerous one for us. I think we can do it on the PlayStation Network, which is where you can go in and just buy games for a few pounds, so there's less overheads and less risk. Then potentially we can be more abstract in what we do and more adventurous than making full-length games. I don't think we're going to do it in a full-length game for a while yet, though, because the public, I don't think a person will, Joe Public will go in and pick it up on a shelf and we'll just go, I don't really get that. I haven't seen anything like that before, so I'm a bit worried about spending my £40 or £50 on it.
So it's essentially a game for games designers and their parents.
Yeah, it's great. It uses the 6-axis controller. You should check it out. It's really it's just completely different from anything that's been before. And looking at it at HD, I personally think it's a really good example of why it should be on HD as opposed to PAL or anything. You just wouldn't get the same effect, because there are just simple colours, blues and reds, and then the shapes are white standing out, and you just go submerged through these layers, and then there's a soft kind of blur transition as you go deeper in the water, and it's I'm not going to do it any justice trying to describe it in words, but what you'd term as a proper game, I guess. So yeah, there's definitely mileage in that, I think, but perhaps further down the line or through that avenue.